Hello and welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're looking closely at something many of you will have noticed. There's just so much more talk about mental health these days. And this is a fantastic chance for you to pick up some new English vocabulary and really practice your listening. We'll try to speak clearly at a pace that works for, say, B2 to C1 learners.
That's right. It's really hard to miss, isn't it, how much more openly mental health is discussed now. And while this is, generally seen as a really positive thing,
Yeah, definitely.
some interesting research, including findings from places like New Zealand and this idea of looping effects, suggests maybe we should consider some less obvious sides to all this awareness.
Exactly. We've been looking at different articles discussing the benefits, the good things about mental health campaigns, but also some, let's say, potential concerns that researchers are raising.
Right.
So our goal today is pretty simple. Help you understand these sometimes complex ideas in clear English. And we'll also share some practical tips along the way, things to help your language skills.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe just how much things have changed.
Let's kick off there.
Yeah.
Just think about how different the conversation around mental health is compared to, say, 10 or 20 years ago. You see campaigns everywhere, TV, social media,
Different line.
articles, people talking about their own experiences much more freely. It really feels like a shift in public dialogue.
Absolutely. And the intention behind it, the main aim, is definitely positive. It's about reducing stigma. Now, stigma, that's a key word for you listeners. It basically means those negative attitudes, the negative beliefs people might have about something.
Like judging people.
Exactly. In this case, about mental health problems. The hope is if we reduce that stigma, it becomes easier for people to, ask for help when they need it.
Makes sense.
So what happens when awareness goes up like this? Well, one of the first things you tend to see is more people actually reporting that they're experiencing mental health problems. Now, this increase, it can come from several places, and some are definitely good things.
Like what, for instance?
Well, firstly, all these campaigns mean more information is out there, more resources. This helps build better mental health literacy.
Literacy, so like understanding.
Exactly. Mental health literacy just means a better public understanding of what mental health actually is, what the signs might be, and so on.
Okay, right. And if you understand something better, you're probably more likely to recognize it, either in yourself or maybe someone you know.
Precisely. And like you said, that reduction in stigma is just huge. If people feel less ashamed or, less embarrassed about struggling, they're naturally going to be more willing to talk about it, to seek support. And that, of course, means more reported cases.
Okay, so far so good. Increased awareness seems to be doing some of what it's supposed to do. But you mentioned earlier there might be some potential downsides or complexities. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Tell us about this idea of prevalence inflation.
Yeah, this is a really important point to dig into. There's a paper from Folks and Andrews came out in 2023. They suggest that, yes, increased awareness leads to more accurate people recognizing symptoms they didn't before.
Right.
But it might also have another effect. They propose that some people might start interpreting milder forms of distress.
Distress. What do we mean by that exactly?
Good question. Distress here really means those feelings of worry or sadness or stress that are, a pretty normal part of human life. Ups and downs.
Okay, so everyday difficulties maybe.
Kind of, yeah. And the concern is that people might start interpreting that normal distress as an actual mental health problem, like depression or an anxiety disorder.
I see. So feeling down because something disappointing happened might get labeled as, oh, I must have depression.
That's the potential issue, yes. And it gets even more complex because Folks and Andrews also suggest that labeling that normal distress as a mental health problem could sometimes actually make things worse for the person.
Oh, so?
It could become what they call a self-fulfilling prophecy.
A self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, right.
Right. That's a really useful phrase for our listener. Can you give a simple example of how that works, just generally?
Sure. Imagine like a student who keeps hearing they're bad at math.
Okay.
They might start to believe it, maybe stop trying so hard, feel anxious about it, and then guess what? They actually do perform poorly. They've fulfilled the initial idea.
Right. The belief influenced the outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So apply that to mental health. If someone convinces themselves that their completely normal nervousness before, say, a public speaking event is a sign of a serious anxiety disorder,
Yeah.
that belief itself might make them more anxious, more focused on the physical feelings, more overwhelmed, actually potentially making the experience worse than it needed to be.
That makes a scary amount of sense, actually, the label itself changing the experience. Now, you also mentioned something called concept creep. What's that?
Concept creep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this idea that the meaning of certain words, especially words related to harm or pathology, think bullying or trauma or even abuse, they can sort of gradually stretch out over time.
To stretch out, meaning they cover more ground?
Exactly. Their definitions become broader, maybe less specific in everyday conversation than their original, perhaps clinical or legal meaning.
I think I know what you mean. Like maybe things that used to be seen as just, I don't know, being mean or having an argument might now get called bullying more readily.
That's a common example people give, yes. And the concern here is that something similar might be happening with our understanding of what constitutes a mental disorder.
So that term itself might be broadening.
Potentially, yes. The edges might be getting fuzzier. It might be starting to include a wider range of human experiences, maybe even fairly normal emotional ups and downs.
Yeah.
And, one potential consequence of that is straining resources meant for people with really severe conditions.
So we end up using the same big label, mental disorder, for experiences that are maybe quite different in severity or nature, which sort of brings us to the New Zealand situation you mentioned. That seems like a real-world case study of some of this.
It does offer some striking data points.
Yes.
Tell us about what the statistics show there.
Well, in New Zealand, the stats show a really significant rise in people reporting poor mental well-being, especially among younger people.
How significant are we talking?
Well, over a quarter of the whole population now describes their mental well-being as poor, and that number's been climbing. But specifically for young people aged 15 to 24, get this. The percentage reporting high psychological distress jumped from about 5% back in 2011-12 to nearly 24%, 23.6% to be exact, in 2021-22.
Wow. That's more than a fourfold increase in a decade.
It really is. It's a massive jump, and these figures really make you think about those ideas like prevalence inflation and maybe those looping effects we'll get to.
Definitely. So what are the potential reasons behind such a dramatic increase? There must be multiple factors.
Oh, absolutely. And researchers point to a lot of things we're all aware of, things impacting people globally. The stress from COVID-19, definitely.
Sure.
Rising cost of living, big societal issues like inequality, worries about climate change, the whole social media pressure cooker.
Right, all those major stressors.
Yeah. And challenges within the mental health system itself, like access and waiting times, all those are likely playing a big part.
But there's potentially more to it.
Well, that's what some research suggests. Another factor being considered is what they call the paradoxical effects of all this heightened mental health awareness.
Paradoxical. Okay, so that means something that seems contradictory. It produces an effect you wouldn't expect.
Exactly. The idea is that the very efforts designed to help mental health might sort of unintentionally be contributing to this rise in reported problems.
So something we think of as purely good raising awareness might have some, unexpected side effects.
That's the concern being explored, yes. One aspect is that with such a heavy focus on mental health problems, people might start to see these issues as almost an inevitable part of who they are.
Like it's fixed, part of their identity.
Yeah, or maybe purely down to their brain chemistry, something totally outside their control.
And why is that viewpoint potentially problematic?
Well, it could potentially lessen a person's sense of personal agency.
Agency. Let's unpack that word for our listener.
Good idea. Agency in this context means your feeling, your belief that you actually have some control, that you can influence your own life and your own well-being.
Right. The feeling that you can do something about your situation.
Exactly. And if you start to believe your mental health is just, say, fixed biology, you might feel less empowered to take those positive steps yourself. You might feel like, well, what's the point?
I see. It could perhaps lead to a feeling of helplessness, maybe, or hinder someone from even trying things that could help if they feel it's all predetermined.
That's the potential danger, yes. Thinking, this is just how my brain is wired, nothing I do will really change it.
And there's another related point, isn't there, about traditional coping mechanisms?
Yes. Some research suggests that a really strong focus on formal mental health diagnoses and treatments might, again unintentionally, discourage people from using those sort of more everyday coping strategies.
Like talking to friends or family.
Exactly. Or making positive lifestyle changes, exercise, getting outside, hobbies, things that people have always done to manage stress or low mood. The worry is that the focus shifts too much towards the problem needing a fix, perhaps overshadowing these valuable personal and social resources.
That's a really interesting nuance. It's not that formal help isn't vital, but that maybe we shouldn't lose sight of these other ways people cope and build resilience.
Precisely. Now, you mentioned looping effects a couple of times. This sounds like a core concept here. Could you elaborate on that? Who came up with it and how does it connect?
Yeah, absolutely. This ties back to the work of a philosopher named Ian Hacking. He developed this really insightful theory of looping effects, and it helps us understand how these social categories we create.
Like mental disorders.
Exactly. How categories like mental disorders aren't just passive labels. They can actually interact with and influence the very people who get put into those categories. It's a kind of dynamic two-way street.
Okay, hang on. So the label isn't just describing something that already exists independently. It actually shapes it somehow.
That's the core idea. Hacking talks about interactive kinds. These are specific types of categories, human categories, mostly that interact with the people they classify. Think about getting a diagnosis, say, for ADHD or autism. That label doesn't just sit there. It can change how you see yourself, how others treat you, what support you seek, maybe even how you behave or experience the world. The category interacts with the person.
Right, I see. It changes things for the person involved.
Yes. And Hacking points out that as we become more aware of certain ways of being or certain forms of distress, and we create labels for them, those labels themselves can then shape how people understand their own experiences and maybe even how they express them.
So the act of naming and categorizing creates a kind of feedback loop. Is that the idea?
Pretty much, yeah. Hacking actually described two main kinds of looping effects. The first he called human kinds. This is where the categories literally shape how people understand themselves and can even lead to sort of new ways of being that person. His classic example was multiple personality disorder, arguing the category itself influenced how people experienced and presented those symptoms over time.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, and the second type?
The second is called dynamic nominalism. This is more about how the category itself changes over time. As people react to being labeled, maybe they conform to expectations, maybe they push back against them, the definition and the social understanding of the category can shift.
Can you give an example?
Think about something like adolescence or teenager. That category didn't always exist in the way we understand it now. Societal expectations, behavior, scientific understanding, they all interacted, and the meaning and experience of being a teenager has evolved. The name, the category, is dynamic.
Okay. So how does this connect back to mental health awareness and the concerns we've been discussing?
Well, the connection is this. If these categories like depression or anxiety disorder are interactive and dynamic, then the huge increase in awareness and discussion might be actively reshaping them. And one concern, linking back to Folks and Andrews, is that this might be contributing to an over-pathologizing of normal life experiences.
Over-pathologizing. So treating something normal as if it's a medical problem, basically.
Exactly. Turning everyday sadness, worry, or stress into a symptom that needs a diagnosis.
So that nervousness before a presentation, which most people feel,
might get interpreted, maybe by the person themselves or even others, as a sign of a clinical anxiety disorder, when perhaps it's just, well, normal nerves.
And Hacking's looping effect idea suggests this isn't harmless.
Right, because as we discussed with the self-fulfilling prophecy idea, believing that your normal distress is actually a sign of a serious problem can, ironically, increase your anxiety, make you focus on it more, and lead to a more negative experience overall. The label loops back and affects the person.
Okay, wow. So we've covered quite a bit, the rise in awareness, the definite positives like reduced stigma, but also these potential complexities, prevalence, inflation, concept creep, the New Zealand data, and now these looping effects. So what's the takeaway here? What should we, especially as language learners trying to understand these discussions, be thinking about?
I think the key takeaway is that while raising awareness was and is important, maybe the next step needs to be moving towards greater mental health literacy.
Literacy again, so deeper understanding, not just awareness.
Exactly. It's not enough just to know mental health issues exist. We need a better collective understanding of what actually counts as a clinical mental health problem versus what falls within the range of normal, albeit sometimes difficult, human emotions like sadness, grief, or worry.
So really being able to tell the difference between, say, having a bad week and experiencing clinical depression that might need professional support.
Precisely. It suggests we need perhaps clearer definitions, or at least a more nuanced public conversation about what we mean by mental disorder. And crucially, we need to talk about mental health in ways that acknowledge all the influences, biology, environment, experiences, but without erasing that sense of personal agency we talked about.
Right, keeping that feeling that people can take steps, that change is possible.
Maintaining hope, essentially. It's a balance.
That definitely sounds like a more balanced way to look at it. Okay, now for all of you listening and learning English, we've definitely hit on some important vocabulary today. Maybe we can quickly review a few key ones.
Good idea.
We had stigma, remember? Those negative attitudes. We talked about mental health literacy. That's about understanding mental health properly. We use distress for general feelings of worry or sadness. Paradoxical describes something seemingly contradictory.
Like awareness potentially increasing reported problems.
Exactly. Yeah. Then agency, that feeling of control, over-pathologizing, labeling normal things as medical issues. The self-fulfilling prophecy where belief makes something happen.
And hacking's ideas. Interactive kinds of categories that affect people.
And dynamic nominalism, how those categories change. Oh, and concept creep when word meanings get broader.
Those are definitely the core ones from today. And here's a practical tip for boosting your English speaking. Try actually using some of these phrases. Maybe repeat a sentence like, increased awareness might have paradoxical effects.
Or you could try explaining the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy to yourself. Or even better, to a language partner or friend. Use your own words. Discussing the topic itself is great practice.
Definitely.
And here's a quick example dialogue to listen for pronunciation and natural flow. Imagine two friends talking.
Ugh. I've been feeling so stressed about exams. I think I might actually have anxiety.
Oh, exams are super stressful. It's normal to feel that way. Maybe try taking some proper study breaks, get some fresh air. If it feels really overwhelming or doesn't let up after exams, then yeah, maybe talking to a counselor could be helpful.
See how person B validates the feeling, acknowledges the stress, but gently grounds it in the situation, and suggests everyday coping strategies first. It doesn't immediately jump to a disorder label.
Exactly. Listen for the intonation, too, the way our voices go up and down. It adds a lot of meaning.
And another tip, this time for listening. Maybe listen back to this section later. Don't try to understand everything. Just focus on spotting those key vocabulary words we reviewed. Can you hear stigma? Can you hear agency? It really helps embed them.
Great advice. Okay, so let's try and summarize the main points. We've seen that boosting mental health awareness has definitely done good things, like reducing stigma, which is huge.
Absolutely crucial.
But it seems there might also be some unintended consequences. We're seeing more people reporting problems, but this increase might not purely reflect a rise in severe illness. It could also involve factors like awareness itself, leading people to interpret normal distress differently.
And this powerful idea that the very categories and labels we use can loop back and influence our experiences and even the definitions themselves.
So the push now seems to be towards moving from just awareness to deeper mental health literacy, being able to make better distinctions.
Yes, distinguishing between typical human emotional responses and conditions that likely need clinical support.
Yeah.
And always framing these discussions in a way that promotes agency and hope.
Right. So maybe a final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder. How much does the way we talk about our feelings, the words we use, the labels we apply, actually shape how we experience those feelings?
That's a deep one.
And where is that line, which often feels quite blurry, between normal human ups and downs and something we'd call a mental health problem? Thinking about that might help us all navigate this complex area more thoughtfully.
Absolutely. And for everyone using this deep dive to improve their English, remember, engaging with complex topics like this is fantastic practice. You're building vocabulary, tuning your ear to conversation, and gaining knowledge all at once.
Keep practicing, keep listening, keep exploring ideas in English.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today. We really hope it's been useful, both for understanding the topic and for your language learning. Until next time.